Well, hi everybody. We are ready to get started. Looks like we've got a whole bunch of people here today. So welcome to today's class. We're going to be talking about the key to powerful storyboards. And I'm not going to leave you in suspense. We're just going to lead right into it and tell you that the key to powerful storyboards is creating emotional involvement. This is the reason that we're here. This is the reason that we're doing all of this, is to create, through our stories and through our storyboards, a feeling, an emotion in the audience. Get them to get excited, to feel laughter, to feel any number of different things. And there's some tools that we can use as storyboard artists to heighten that emotional involvement. So we'll just jump right in and I'll show you an example of something that doesn't have an emotional involvement. This is a very common thing that you would see on the news, which is one of these car chase. And the thing is, we're seeing this car chase from the point of view of like a helicopter. And because we're looking at it from a distance, we don't really feel like all caught up in it. We're just kind of seeing it as observers. But as a filmmaker, a car chase would be filmed in a way like this, much closer down, to the level of where all the action is happening. We can see things like, the ground is tilting a little bit as we're moving, and objects are coming, directly toward us rather than we're just seeing them from an outside source. Here, in another situation of showing the emotional involvement, we're actually inside the cab of this car, looking at this guy's face, really being able to focus on his emotions. And again, another shot here from his point of view, seeing the shots that have a really interesting composition. We'll see that composition can be part of heightening the emotional involvement too. This is a very chaotic kind of composition with different shapes and a tilt and all kinds of different jagged things going on. So composition is going to help that too. So again, see, here's an example of a car that's careening right into our face, as if we're part of the story. So when it comes to creating emotional involvement, like I said, this is the whole reason that we're doing this. We're trying to communicate with the viewer, create an emotional experience. And the best part is about movies and cartoons and the things that we create is that we're creating an emotional experience that is vicarious, meaning that it's not really happening to us. But because it's vicarious, it's also fun. We're not at risk. Everything is safe, but we want it to still feel very real. Stories have been called an emotion delivery mechanism. And I love that description because that really helps us focus on what we're trying to do. So the more effectively that we can communicate that emotion, the stronger our stories are going to be. So here's another great example. We've all kind of seen these surveillance cam videos of a robbery. But again, imagine if you took one of these security cam robberies, and now we're kind of looking on it from the outside. But here in a film like Pulp Fiction, we're down with the action. This feels a lot more intense, a lot more scary. And if we even boost it further to have that action coming like right toward us, somebody's pointing a gun almost directly toward us, not quite in our face, but it might as well be. We're feeling the emotion that the character is going to be feeling. So there's 4 ways here that you can create emotional involvement. There's more than 4, but what I want to talk about today are 4 because that'll help us focus in on what we want to do. And those 4 ways, and I'm going to explain each one, are using the subjective camera, using narrative perspective, includes keeping a low horizon line. We're going to talk about staging and framing, which we discussed briefly a few moments ago, and a big one, which is reaction shots. So before anything else, when you're storyboarding, it seems silly to have to point this out, but it's the most important thing, and so many people will end up skipping it, which is that for every drawing that you do, make sure that you think about what the story is about. And that's going to help you focus your drawings on what the most important thing to be drawing is, and the kind of emotion that you're looking to get across. So first of all, I wanted to talk to you about this thing, the subjective camera. This isn't a term that you hear very often. It's just a way that I use to describe using the camera. And with the subjective camera, the idea of what this is a technique to align the camera itself with the character's point of view. It's a way of putting your audience into the story rather than having them just as passive onlookers. That way we as a viewer are standing with the characters and we're seeing the scene from their POV, which from their point of view. And that helps us feel like we're involved. So this is just an illustration. In those security cam videos, this is the kind of thing that's going on, is we as an audience, if this is us, we as the audience are in a situation like that looking down into almost like a dollhouse. It's something that doesn't really affect us personally, and so we don't have a big emotional involvement to it. But with the technique of the subjective camera, we're able to take the viewer and plop them right into the story, so that instead of a robbery like this, you'd be able to draw a robbery with a drawing like this, which is a lot more emotionally impactful than just seeing it from the outside. So to use the subjective camera, let me show you how we do it. When I talk about the subjective camera, what this really is when we talk about camera in terms of storyboard, we're really referring to the camera as a stand-in for us as the viewer. So we're not talking about a physical camera that we're moving around, unless you're filming a live action film. But we're drawing storyboards here, so we're seeing it through the eyes of the viewer. So when I talk about the camera, it's also our point of view as an artist. So there's different things that you can do with the camera as you move it around. One is just simply to crane it up and down within a scene. You can do this, which is a pan going from one side to another. You can do a tilt like this, which is actually a vertical tilt. And then there's a kind of tilt that would go around from top to bottom. So there's a lot of different things that you can do with the camera. If you want to use angles, though, for an emotional effect, then you can use those camera angles strategically, in a sense. So if you were filming something or looking at something, this pointing something upward like this would be an upshot. Pointing it down like this would be a downshot. Now that's all pretty basic, but I want to show you how you can use those things to create specific emotions. The topic, though, of the subjective camera, though, is shooting not up and down like I showed you here, but rather around the viewer, trying to find a place along the object that is going to feel like we're more involved. So if that object were a person, then you could see we could start filming from the side of this person. We could swing the camera around to be shooting at them 3/4. We could put the camera right here and be shooting at them directly in front of them. We can, continue that circle around to another 3/4 shot until finally we get to another profile. So what's the difference? Well, the difference is going to create a different emotional response. So let me show you. If the camera is way over here on the side of a character, and we take a picture of them, or we imagine the picture, what we're going to get as a result is like a profile shot. And that's what we call an objective shot. We're looking at the person almost as an object. We're not feeling any emotional involvement. There's a distance between us. Now, if we were to swing that camera around and point it directly in the face of our character, then we would see a straight-on shot as if we were looking directly into their face. And this is a purely subjective shot, meaning that we as a viewer, we're part of the subject. We're seeing it from our point of view. But for films, this is actually too involved. You don't have too many movies or cartoons where the character is speaking directly to the audience or directly to the camera, although there are some exceptions, and I'll show you those in an example. Here is that example of the the absolute subjective camera, which is from Silence of the Lambs. And we're actually seeing this scene from the point of view of the killer. And so we're looking through his goggles. It's night vision, so poor Jodie Foster over here doesn't know what's going on. As you can see from this hand here, the murderer, is putting out his hand, and we are in his head. We are in his eyes. So this is a purely subjective shot, which we don't use very frequently. You can see again his hand right here, reaching out to touch her face in what is a totally creepy scene. But it's in the movie for a reason, for us to feel the confrontation between the two of these and to get inside this sick killer's head for a moment. But the best place in between those two settings, we talked about this one, the objective from the side, and then the subjective directly in front, is a three-quarter view. And what a three-quarter view means is that you've putting the camera in such a way that it is, in between one side and the other. It's like 3/4 difference between the profile and the front. And the result that we get when we look from that angle is just right. This is the angle that you'll see in most films and most cartoons. This is what we call the three-quarter view. And that helps us feel the emotional involvement without getting right into their face. So here's a fascinating example where a filmmaker uses these tools to get a really powerful emotion. This is a scene from Pulp Fiction in which this character is talking to a little boy, and you can see that we're seeing him from a three-quarter view, and it's a pretty intimate scene, and he's talking to us as if like we're sitting there just next to the person that he's talking to. Characters also he gets closer and closer as the scene progresses, so the emotion gets more involved too. So this is actually part of the topic of framing as a way to increase emotional involvement as well. But we're not talking about that. I just wanted to drop it in really quick. But watch to see what Quentin Tarantino does here. As the scene progresses, he all of a sudden switches to a completely subjective point of view where the character is looking right in our face. Now, when you watch this film and you hear the character telling this amazingly creepy story, and then we cut to this straight-on shot, it's a shock. It's really intense, and it finally boosts up the emotion, but it also boosts up our involvement with this character, because the whole point of this scene is that this is a memory that one of the characters is having, and it's such an intense story that we need to identify, we need to understand what Bruce Willis's motivation is going to be. So he's thinking back, we're seeing this through his eyes. It's a very, very powerful moment. So again, using the subjective camera, I'll show you where you want to be. It's a good illustration of it. If you have two characters on a stage, you're looking like from the audience's point of view, not too much emotional involvement. We're looking flat at them from their profile. You can see this gray shape here. This kind of represents us. This is my head sitting in the audience looking at these characters. So for us to use the subjective camera, though, we want to film along the axis of action for more involvement. Again, we're covering a lot of material here, but the axis of action is an imaginary line that takes place between the main characters. So instead of filming directly against that axis of action, we want to start to bring our camera around to move alongside of it. And let me show you how that works. As we move alongside of it, we see it from the point of view of the characters themselves more and more. And we'll also start to show some over-the-shoulder shots. You may have heard that term. It's a very frequent term, especially in drama. Seeing the characters from over the shoulder of their other conversation partner really makes us feel like we're part of the conversation. And when we use the subjective camera, the background is more likely to move in that kind of a shot because we're staying with the character when they move. But let me show you how this progresses. Here we are looking at them from the straight audience view, but now if we start to move in and we're looking at them, these red lines kind of describe our field of vision. This is what it's going to look like through our camera. It's a little bit more involved than just flat on. So that is getting more and more involved, getting more emotionally involved in the characters. Again, we can use this for over-the-shoulder shots, but now if we move in even more, closer to the characters, and our angle that we're looking at is more along this axis of action that we were talking about, then all of a sudden what we're seeing is going to look like this if it's seen through our camera's eyes. Because as you can see, if I'm standing here over her shoulder, kind of looking through my camera, I'll see a little bit of her and I'll see a lot of him, and she's going to be really, really close to the camera. So that's where we get that over-the-shoulder shot. It's very effective to make us feel like we're part of the conversation, and that's what this whole thing is about, creating emotional involvement. That's the horizontal range of actions. Again, the subjective means more emotional involvement, but the objective, when we're standing far away from them, like they're on a stage, that's actually better for just straight information or comedy. So the point I want to make is that you don't always want to have a very strong composition with a lot of depth. Sometimes for comedy staging, it's funny and much more effective to have a scene in this flatter kind of look. There's a saying that basically comedy is frequently staged flat, and action is frequently staged with more depth. So I just wanted to say that you don't want to use this technique all the time. That's why it's important, as I was saying at the beginning, to always think about what your scene is about. So in this example, a character is conking another character on the head with a hammer. It's a little cute little scene like you would see in Abbott and Costello or Laurel and Hardy or a Looney Tunes, something where, hey, you know what, we're not really worried about this guy getting a concussion because it feels like a silly scene. But here's the other side of that. If you wanted to show a more horrific person, like if a person's really getting hit by a hammer, like in a horror movie or in a crime movie, then you would shoot it from a more subjective angle. So rather than seeing this guy simply hammer toward the side, now we're going to see him. Now we're seeing him actually using that hammer, and it's going to be like swing. It's almost coming right into our face, and so it's pretty dramatic. We're really going to feel something by watching it from this angle. All right, so let me show you some examples from some movies that you may or may not have seen. This is a typical kind of drama scene. You can see the techniques that I talked about in action. When scenes frequently start, they will start more of it as a distance, characters just having a conversation. But then later on, we start to move in for that over-the-shoulder shot, as we do in this scene from When Harry Met Sally. And then alternately, as the characters are talking, it switches from one to another. So now we're going from one over-the-shoulder shot to another over-the-shoulder shot, and the conversation continues. And then, in terms of, like I said, in terms of framing, which is one of the techniques, framing will also be effective because now we're closing in our camera frame closer on the emotions of the characters. So no longer seeing the over the shoulder, we really get to focus on the emotions of the characters. And you'll see that that does the same when it corresponds over to their partner in the conversation. And these kind of shots really let us see any intense emotion that's going on in the character's face. It's not, this is like way too subtle to use in most cases when you're doing animation, but for live action, it works very well. Another example, this is from Pulp Fiction. We showed you the robbery scene at the beginning, but here the characters are, we're starting gently as we see these two characters at a diner. It's a pretty flat shot, but as they start talking about a robbery, we move in and we can see, the intensity on the character's eyes. And then we cut back over to her partner, and he's, we can see this, we can see his body language. You see that with his shoulder and arm? It's really getting very active. So, body language and acting is a whole area that we won't be having time to get into today, but we're just focusing on other camera techniques. As the scene progresses, look, we're even closer, the emotions are even more intense, great expressions, and again, even closer. So that's framing, and has to do with the subjective angle. Look, we're almost looking directly into his face. Now compare that with how the scene started, where, you know, it's practically a profile. I mean, this is a 3/4 view, but look at the difference between that view and this profile view over here. And then later on, you know, we're really getting a close look and then an even closer look. So that's the subjective camera. The robbery starts, you know, we start really getting into it. Now, that's just the horizontal range of angles, you know, from where are we going to move our camera along the sideways axis. But we could do this with the vertical range of angles too, through up shots and through down shots. So if you have a couple of characters in a room, I drew this illustration so that you can see the ceiling, you can see the walls, you can see the floor, you can see this wall, and you can see the back wall. You can see everything because it's going to help me show you how you can use up shots and down shots for emotional involvement. So if this big tough character here is looking at this little shrimpy character here, in a downward shot, we can kind of see what the drawing is going to look like if we look through his field of vision. We're going to see some of this floor, we're going to see a little bit of this wall, we're going to see all of him, and let's take a look and see what it's going to look like. Down shots are used when the characters, in this case, are looking downward, and when looking from the point of view of a taller or a stronger character. So we're looking from the point of view of this bully character, but now let's see what it looks like if we were the camera. Boom. You know, we're seeing exactly what I showed you here. We're seeing the floor, we're seeing this wall, we're seeing some of this wall, and we're seeing all of this character in a downshot angle. So you can see that floor, wall, wall, and here's this character, excuse me. You can see his entire body, and we can see it in sort of a downshot angle. So here's some tips that you can use to draw these downshots to make them very, very easily. Usually the horizon line is above the frame. We'll talk about horizon line in a little bit. Usually in a down shot, we're going to see the floor or the ground like we did in the previous shot. And another tip to help you draw down shots is that you should curve ellipses like stripes downward. So what the heck does that mean? Let me show you. Here's that shrimpy character, and here's like the bottom of this character's body. But if we really want to show that it's a down shot, then that could be drawn like with more of a curve. And if he had stripes on his shirt, now right now it looks like a flat shot, but I'm going to take my magic eraser here, and now if I drew the same things with a slight curve to them, it helps us feel like we're looking at him from above. I can also, with this character, make sure that he's looking upward, which often helps to make a character feel like he's being looked at from above. And I want to make sure that I've drawn the floor in there and maybe some of the walls. So that's way that you can show it very simply by adding in all of those features. So let me just erase some of those things, and I'll show you if I drew the same thing but without those, if I kind of just gave him flat lines and a flat background, as a lot of people will draw in their storyboards, well, it doesn't really depict that down shot. And take a look what happens when those stripes in a down shot, they kind of curve, and the floor will really be able to look like we're looking down at the floor. So here's some examples that you could do if you were looking down a cliff or down into a pit. You would be a good opportunity for you to use a down shot. Or if you were looking down at Plankton, who's like in SpongeBob is a very tiny character. So here's an example, like in the movie Silence of the Lambs. Again, there's a pit where a girl is being held captive, and here's the bad guy is looking down into the pit. One of the ways that we get an effective angle on that is that as he's looking down at the girl into the pit, we can kind of see her jeopardy by seeing way down into the pit. We've angled our camera so that we're looking way, way down here, and we can see this horrified girl looking up at us. And she's way down there, and and she's screaming to be let out. So that really makes us feel like, whoa, I could really feel the depth of that shot rather than just shooting it from the side like this. So let me erase those. And then I'm going to show you what we frequently did on SpongeBob when we were using a down shot to show Plankton. So Plankton is this little character. He's very, very small. He's really tiny. But the way to make him look really tiny in a storyboard drawing is to not only use framing, again, by making sure he doesn't fill the frame. Sometimes if you want a character to look small, then make sure that you draw them small in the frame. You don't always have to go for a close-up. Oftentimes it's better if you don't. But I did mention that the horizon line tends to be much higher and usually above the frame in a down shot. And again, if you don't know much about horizon line, we're going to be talking about that in a little bit. So just to show you, like if there were floor tiles, then you could see that we're looking down at the floor, and this makes Plankton look really small. So that's a way that you can use down shots to create some sense. In this case, the emotional sense we just want to get is like, oh, here's the bad guy, but in reality, he's just a pathetic little bug. So sometimes that's good for comedy as well. So the flip side of that is the upshots. You use an upshot when you're looking upward. If you're looking upward from the pit, it would be a great time to use the upshot, because then we'll feel like we're looking from the point of view of the captive. Also, if you're looking up at a very tall building. So we're going to go back to our example here. If now our shrimpy little character is looking upward at the tough guy, then we can see from these red lines, like his field of vision, that we're going to see a little bit of the ceiling, a little bit of the wall, a little bit of this wall perhaps, but most importantly, we're only going to see the top of this guy's body because he's so big and we're looking up at him. So there's the shot as seen through the eyes of this little guy. So take a look again. If you just sort of see it through their field of vision, it actually shows you through these red imaginary marks what you would need to draw if you were wanting to show this scene from the shrimpy character's point of view. Move ahead again, and you can see we only see the upper part of his body. We see some of that ceiling. We see some of the back wall, and we see a little bit of that side wall. Another example from production example is here's Dr. Doofenshmirtz from Phineas and Ferb, and this is a bit of an upshot, not quite as extreme as the one that we just showed, but again, you can see part of that ceiling in this shot, and you also don't see his whole body. It's as if we're looking up at him. And there's also some angle things happening here to keep it feeling like he's looking down. One of the tricks that we did with Doofenshmirtz is that we used his nose as an arrow. So when he's talking to a character, it really helps us feel like we know where we're moving. So again, that's just one of the ways you can get that across just simply with your drawing. Just angle your characters. Here he's pointing at someone, and his eyes are looking this way, his nose is looking that way. So that's one example. Another great fun example of an upshot is this is seen from Plankton's point of view. Plankton is looking up at SpongeBob. And this is extremely rare that we would ever see SpongeBob drawn in this kind of an upshot. But once again, the point of this is that in this scene, in this rare scene, we're seeing SpongeBob from the point of view of little teeny Plankton. And because it's from his point of view, we're seeing SpongeBob as if he were a giant. So let's move ahead. Oh, here's another example. This is from Hey Arnold. It's a chance to use an upshot. Again, we're looking way up at these characters. Let's just focus on this one right now. It's the same sort of thing. We're only seeing the upper half of her body. The sky is in the background, so that's as if we could see a ceiling behind her. Let me get rid of that. And it just so happened that with this scene, I designed it in such a way so that we feel these characters are conspiring, and that's what gives it the emotional feeling, is that they're all gathered in a group. But the point of it was that the scene would be pretty boring if I just showed these 6 characters standing in a huddle. So I'm always looking for a way to find out what's the emotion in this scene. In this case, the emotion was, hey, all these kids are getting together to try to figure out how they can get rid of the teacher they don't like. And so I would picture them kind of like getting together and really coming up with some kind of a plan. So tips to make drawing these easy, again, is that in an upshot, the horizon is below the frame. We would curve ellipses like stripes upward, actually, when we're looking in an upshot. And often we'll see the ceiling or the tops of furniture and fixtures. Well, I'll show you an example of that. So if I'm got a character here and I'm looking up at him, let's say he's a big mean character, I'm only going to see generally the upper part of his body, and that the horizon line, which is where your feet meet the ground or where the sky meets the earth, that's way below the frame. Like we wouldn't even see the ground. It's way, way down there. So that's one thing. The horizon line is down below the frame. If this guy has a striped shirt, what I'm going to do is take those stripes or anything like a collar and make those curves go upward instead. See that slight curve on that makes it, even on his collar or on his sleeves, see if I make that a curve, makes me feel like we're looking up at him now. All right, and to make sure that we really feel like we're looking up, I could draw the ceiling in the background of this shot. So there's like the ceiling, and now it really feels like we're looking up at a character. But even more so, sometimes a really good, easy way to make it look like an upshot and put a good background in there is to draw furniture and bookshelves and things like that, but only the tops of them. So for example, if there's a bookshelf in the background, we would see the bookshelf and maybe like a potted plant on top. But you'll notice that we're seeing the top of the bookshelf because the bottom of the bookshelf is way down here below the frame. So there's all kinds of little cheats like that you can do to make it very quick and easy, just to make it look like you're looking at an upshot. So these shots mean something to us emotionally. We really feel something. Let me show you like the shot in Silence of the Lambs so that we can feel that emotion. So if you recall, we got this girl that's down at the bottom of a pit. But now from her point of view, if she's inside the pit and she's freaking out because she's trapped and she looks up, then what we're going to see is if we're standing in her place almost, we're going to see the very top of the pit with the bad guy looking down at her, yelling at her, and it's like, oh my gosh, that looks so much scarier when we see it. Here's like all these gross bricks and things like that, and if I were shading it, I would make this all dark. And this guy's really mad. He's like, oh, you're next. The point is that seeing it from the character's point of view really makes us feel that emotion. So the emotion that we feel in this case when we look up at something is like, oh my gosh, that's a giant obstacle to conquer. We could use that in the case of looking up at a building. If you were nervous about coming to your first day at work, you might draw a character standing in front of a giant building. But if we see it from his point of view, as if we're looking up at the building too, we could draw an upshot of that building. And instead of a ceiling, you'd see some clouds. And instead of the tops of furniture, you might just see the tops of a few different buildings. But this drawing tells us something emotionally. It tells us, whatever it is I'm facing, that's going to be a big, tough obstacle. That's like a big monster. Sometimes even a building can feel like a monster. Or in the case of the girl stuck in the hole in the ground, she's looking up, and the emotional feeling that we get is, oh my gosh, I'll never get out of this trap. So a lot of these things, I know we went really, really, really fast. Everything that we talk about, there's much more detail on this if you want to check out the Storyboard Secrets DVD set. I know a lot of you on the call right now, and in this class, a lot of you already have these DVDs, and if you do, if you want a refresher, go back and take a look at Disc 2 for tons of more information on that, because we just cover all of that on that DVD alone. You can also use tilts Tilts are frequently used for chases or emotional shocks, and that's when we actually tilt the camera as if we were tilting our head. And here's an example. You'll see this in chases, you'll see it in a car chase. A tilt can be used to raise the emotional effect. The character is also like coming right toward us. You know, it's very dramatic, and this is a funny scene where in Phineas and Ferb, where Perry the Platypus is he's dressed in costume, and he's riding the scooter up the top of a building. But again, we feel like we're part of the action when we see it coming toward us, and it feels a little bit more intense and action-oriented because the horizon is tilted. Here's another example of the same principles in mind. If you notice, this doorway is tilted as Agent P comes crashing through the wall. So that's part of the tilt in this action scene. Again, gets us feeling more involved in what's going on. And you can also see that I'm using the objects coming like toward us just by having these smashed pieces of wood, you know, shooting out into the audience, into the viewer's face, rather than just flying out sideways of a panel. So a lot of this ties in with the other tool that you can use for creating more powerful storyboards through emotional involvement, is using what we call narrative perspective. And all that really means is that you're using perspective to tell the story itself. That's like we showed in the pit, is in the case of an upshot, if you keep a low horizon line, then characters will move upward when they're moving forward. This is an example that you may have seen a number of times. There will be like 3 characters standing looking at something. And in this case, our horizon line is down here below the frame. And by using a low horizon line, what's going to happen is as characters move forward, they're also going to rise up and get bigger in the frame. So when this person steps forward, you know, this is something that happens very frequently. It's practically a cliche when one character, because of the low horizon line, when you move toward the camera, anything that's above the horizon line is going to move upward, and it's going to move outward. So all of a sudden the emotion increases only because the character is stepping forward in this scene. Here's an example from Phineas and Ferb. You can tell from the perspective lines on the ceiling that the horizon line is way, way, way down below the picture. And so when these characters come bursting through the door, it's a very dramatic shot because, you know, we're seeing them, you know, burst into the room, and they actually get bigger as they move forward. So that scene has a lot of, you know, drama. It sets us up as we, the audience, looking at this scene, feel like, oh my gosh, I want to see whatever it is that they're seeing. So putting that thought in an audience's head, you know, like, oh my gosh, what are they looking at? What are they seeing? That's where the emotional involvement comes in. You can also use 3-point perspective on your upshots and downshots. That's part of narrative perspective. Even on a mild upshot and downshot, using a 3-point perspective can, especially on the backgrounds, can really make you feel like you're in the scene. Now, this is an extremely simple scene for Phineas and Ferb, where Carl the intern is looking down at Baljeet. And the reason I'm showing this particular scene is because it doesn't have to be a drawing as dramatic as the pit that we saw in Silence of the Lambs. Rather, if even on a normal scene like that, you're seeing 3-point perspective because these vertical lines are all moving toward a vanishing point, which is way, 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 way down below the screen. And also, the other lines are converging in perspective also. But this is just a really rough sketch. But it makes the scene feel a lot more powerful and like we're there with the characters because we are sympathizing with Carl in this scene. So if we had just drawn this with plain square windows, it would be kind of boring to look at. And you could really do it the same way without that feeling of a downshot, but it just wouldn't look that good. Anyway, I just wanted to show you this. If you're confused by 3-point perspective, if you're having trouble following what I was talking about in horizon line, one of the DVDs that I have in the Storyboard Secret set is specifically talking about perspective and how to draw perspective simply and quickly as a storyboard artist needs to. So I know I've thrown a lot of stuff at you here. I just want to let you know this is some place where you can go to when you want to find out about perspective and how to learn it quickly without a bunch of rulers and protractors and things like that. So we have to move along quickly, but also to touch on staging and framing. We've done it quite a bit throughout the presentation here today. What I want to show you, though, is that harmony and symmetry in a drawing feels calm and passive, and that's one way to get the feeling, an emotional feeling of stillness, for example. So if you just wanted to draw a simple scene, with a tree, then that would be, very calm and passive. It's very straight up and down. The lines are, very like a lot of parallel lines, things like that. However, when you use angles and asymmetry, they're much more active. So an example of that would be drawing with angles, like in that car chase we saw at the beginning. You not only had angles and the tilt, but you had different shapes, like the overpass was coming down like this, and you had these big pylons, and you had cars moving in all kinds of directions. And in this case, the director wanted to give you a feeling of chaos, and so that was a way, just through composition, of making us feel a different emotion. So here's some examples of good staging that can create an emotional feeling. There's a laundry scene in the Shawshank Redemption, in which one of the characters gets attacked, and I'll show you that in a moment. There's a scene staged in a movie called Morning Glory, where characters are kind of playfully arguing on a staircase, getting one-upsmanship on each other. And there's a great scene where staging is used to help emotion in the movie Leap Year. In Tender Mercies, there's another one. Hopefully I'll get time to show. I'll just show it right now. There's a scene in which some characters are about to receive some bad news. So in that movie, the telephone is placed in the foreground of the shot while the other characters are talking to each other in the background, so that when the telephone rings, we feel it's like a looming monster in the foreground bringing us bad news. So just that little bit of staging created an emotional tension throughout an otherwise ordinary scene. So here's the scene in Shawshank Redemption where the staging actually helps you create an emotion. The character, Andy, has, get a better color here, Andy has gone into a laundry room at the prison he's working at, but we also know that he's at risk of being attacked in the prison. And so in this scene, he's standing over here off to one side, his back is turned to us, so we feel this emptiness. Basically, we feel this entire area of the screen is empty, and over here it's empty too, and it almost feels like we're waiting for something to happen. And sure enough, in a few frames after this, Andy gets attacked by the other people in prison. They all come at him from different angles, and they grab him, and he turns around and he's like, whoa, he doesn't want to get attacked. But the staging of this scene set all that up for us emotionally. This is another scene, this from the movie called Leap Year. And this is, a simple romantic comedy, but a very well-crafted romantic comedy. And in this scene, these travelers, this woman is traveling in Ireland, and she'd gotten a fight with the guy that she was traveling with, and she decides that she wants to go and travel the rest of the way on her own. But as she goes into this bar, she gets confronted by these three kind of local guys, and they're acting kind of menacing to her. And once again, just like that shot that we saw in Shawshank, we see her back, and we see this gigantic area of, where nothing's happening, and we're waiting as an audience to see this vacuum, in a sense, get filled with story or with action. And what our real fear is, and what the feeling, the emotion that this filmmaker is trying to convey onto us, is that he wants us in our imagination. I guarantee you his idea is like, oh my gosh, he wants us to fear, he wants us to feel the fear that they're going to knock this girl onto this pool table where she'll be completely vulnerable to attack. This is like really horrifying. And this scene is unbelievably effective. And in the midst of an otherwise, run-of-the-mill romantic comedy, this kind of staging is really thoughtful, really remarkable. And it's the kind of thing that's very easy for us to all overlook. So another example would be simple stillness can be powerful if that stillness is in contrast to everything else that's going on. So the example for that would be the movie called Strangers on a Train, and I'll do a little sketch. In that case, one character is fleeing across Washington, D.C., trying to run away from this other character. And so there's a big car chase, and he's running around trying to take a taxi, trying to get away. And at one point, this character who's being chased looks out the window, and he sees the Jefferson Memorial in the distance across the street. And as he does, it's a very static shot, very parallel. And there's one guy standing on the steps. And this guy is the character that is after our hero. And in a sense, just his stillness in this shot, it tells us something emotionally, which is telling to the character, hey, you can run anywhere you want to. I'm going to find you. I'm always here in the background, and I know where you are. And that's very, very scary, and it really creates a big emotional feeling for us. So what is a reaction shot is simply when you see a character, you see an event on screen, like an explosion, but instead of just seeing the explosion, we cut away and we see another character making some reaction to this shot, which helps us feel not only this, which is just facts and information, like, oh, okay, yes, there was an explosion, but by seeing the character's emotion, like, let's see, this is a woman who just saw her car blow up, and then it's like, my baby, all of a sudden now we realize, oh, it's not just a car explosion. This is a person, this is a character, this is someone that we can identify with, and we understand what the emotion is because it was not simply a car blowing up. That's what we thought looking at this shot, but what we're actually just found out is that through this reaction shot, we found out that there was a baby in that car. So a reaction shot is one of the most powerful tools to use excuse me, in your storyboards. So what's so special about them is that a character's reaction to an event clarifies and tells us how to feel. So an example of that would be in the movie Wall Street. There are a bunch of stock tickers happening. People on the stock market are selling and buying, and there's a lot of emotion. But for most of us who don't deal with the New York Stock Exchange, we don't really know what those things mean. So again, on screen, if you're just showing facts, then you're going to see stock tickers, like here's Dow, 4.2, etc., all the numbers spinning along those things, telling us how much stocks are going up, how much stocks are going down. But with a reaction shot, like we would have in the movie Wall Street, you have characters who are looking at the stock tickers and they're having some kind of emotion on their face. So right now, this guy is kind of a neutral emotion. We can even draw some other characters in the background to heighten the emotion. But to take it even further, to add a little bit of acting to it, if this character is like, oh my gosh, like we know now that that stock, it's not just numbers scrolling along a screen, that these are people's lives. And then what's happening here is that chances are this guy has just lost all the money in the world, or he's not going to be able to pay that bookie back all the money that he was betting in the stock market. Now he's going to be killed. So it's all about emotion. So that's what those reaction shots are all about. They are an amazingly powerful tool. So all you need to do, in addition to drawing the fact of what's happening on the screen, is to show the character's emotions on the screen. There's another example in a movie called Cockfighter, where it's about guys that go through the South, and they got these chickens with razor blades on their tails, and they put them in a pen, and then the chickens fight, and people bet on them, and all that stuff. And I was amazed watching that movie because, again, if you have these chickens, you're going to see some fun-looking chickens here. Okay, there's some chickens. You got these chickens here, and they're fighting each other in the ring. The problem is, just like the stock tickers, most of us don't really know what's going on when you see two chickens fighting. It's just a bunch of feathers. You can't really tell what's going on. So the solution to that, the storytelling solution to that, is to show that reaction shot and to show the people that are betting on the chickens. And one of them is like, he's really happy. He's like, yeah! He's like, he knows that his bird is winning, and he is very, very happy to see what's going on. So this is a very rough illustration of what was going on in the movie, but it's scribbly, but it's still pretty close. While the other character who was losing, the only way we knew his chicken was losing, because you can't tell because it's just a bunch of feathers, is that the other character was looking at this stuff, and he's like, ugh. He's like biting his nails in worry and fear about his, and he's like sweating. Again, very, very broad, cartoony type of description, but that's what's so special about reaction shots, and that's one of the tools you can use to make your storyboards more powerful, because you're creating that emotional involvement like we've been talking about all throughout this lesson. Reaction shots can also be extremely helpful for breaking up big chunks of dialogue, or to help you with editing. And the reason why is, let's say you have one character talking, and he has a big bunch of dialogue. So here's your script page, and here's the dialogue, and it just goes on forever. Well, if you just stay on this one shot, it's going to be really, really boring. So one of the things you can do is cut away and show the reaction of the other character who's listening. So, for example, the script might say, well, hey, Bill, I told you I was going to pay you back, and all I need is another couple weeks, and etc. But we can cut away, and this character can still be talking off screen while this character is just listening. So we still continue to hear, I know you give me extension a long time, but I really just need a couple more weeks. So that way you can break up a lot of dialogue that's on a page. All of this stuff that we're talking about with reaction shots, along with point of view shots, along with many, many other kind of shots. We go into this again in way, way more detail. For those of you who already have the DVD set, Storyboard Secrets, you can check out Disc 5, and it's going to go into much more detail. You can get a refresher on all of this. So to recap through all of this, the four of the methods that you want to use to make your storyboards more powerful through emotional involvement are using that subjective camera, employing the narrative perspective, using some staging and framing, and also the use of reaction shots. So for much, much more on this, if you can visit storyboardsecrets.com, and I've got a big, giant course that I've developed over the last few years and just recently released over 10 DVDs that are going to show you everything that you would need to know about storyboarding, from the very beginning, where we have a storyboarding crash course, to angles, and got a DVD on angles and framing and screen direction, on acting and posing, on camera moves, on special shots like we just discussed, things on planning out your story from the script phase, thumbnails to roughs to cleanup, also on perspective and digital storyboarding and pitching, and disc on how to get a job and keep it too. So let me show you the web address of that. If you want to click on over to take a look, is at storyboardsecrets.com. And I just want to share with you, I got an email from a storyboard artist who purchased my course recently. Her name is Vivian Heath. She sent me an email, and I asked her, and she totally gave me permission to share her email with you all. And she basically wrote to me and said, this course is amazing. In all my 17 years in animation, I can honestly say I've never come across anything as informative and helpful to my career. No more stress, just fun storyboarding. Well, that made me very happy to hear. She also said that I found so much of this course to be invaluable, guiding me through areas of my work which confuse me no more. In particular, the DVD covering acting and posing, depicting characters' emotion and their communication through good gesturing, knowing when to be economical by creating creative use of cutaways, and reminding myself to keep advancing the story along. So I really appreciate hearing that from Vivian Heath.